Why so many men never grow up. The psychology explained there's something quietly troubling happening in the world right now. Maybe you've seen it in your friends, your partner, your brother, or even in yourself. It's not always loud or obvious. It doesn't always look like failure. In fact, on the surface, it can look like the opposite, like freedom, like fun, like rebellion. But underneath, something is stuck. Something never quite evolves. A boy's body gets older, gets taller, gets stronger, but the inner world remains unfinished. And we call it many things: immaturity, arrested development, emotional unavailability, commitment phobia. But those are just labels. The real question, the one we need to ask, is deeper. Why do so many men never actually grow up? And I'm not talking about growing up in the boring, superficial sense. I'm not about buying a house, or paying taxes, or showing up to work on time. I'm talking about psychological maturity, about emotional evolution, about the ability to take full responsibility for your inner life, your actions, your relationships, your impact on the world. The ability to carry your own weight, not because you're forced to, but because you choose to. Because you realize that freedom without responsibility is not liberation, it's just extended adolescence.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now, here's where things get uncomfortable. Because when we ask why so many men never grow up, we're not just asking about men. We're asking about the invisible systems, assumptions, and cultural messages that shape boys from the moment they're born. We're asking about how masculinity is defined, rewarded, and punished. And most of all, we're asking where the transition between boyhood and manhood is supposed to happen, because for most men, it never does. Not clearly, not consciously, not with guidance. Think about it. When does a boy become a man? In most cultures today, there's no clear rite of passage. No moment where someone says, "You've crossed the threshold. Now you carry the fire." And so boys are left to guess. They try to prove themselves through external markers: sex, money, dominance, rebellion, career success. But internally they remain unsure, fragile, uninitiated. But they remain psychologically tethered to childhood, not in age, but in identity. And without a rite of passage, you don't get a break with the past. You carry your boyhood confusion into your adult life, and it shows up everywhere: in your relationships, your addictions, your need to win, your fear of vulnerability, and your inability to sit still with pain. This is where philosophy meets psychology. Because as much as this is about developmental theory, it's also about the soul, about what it means to become a full human being, not just a collection of impulses and instincts, but a conscious, integrated person. We have to ask, what does it mean to grow up in a world that celebrates external success but punishes emotional depth? What does it mean to become a man when masculinity itself is often confused with power, detachment, and control? And here's the paradox: many men stay boys because the world never teaches them how to be men. It teaches them how to compete, but not how to connect, how to dominate, but not how to feel, how to seduce, but not how to love. And so we end up with men who are brilliant at building things, breaking things, and conquering things, but terrified of being seen, of being soft, of being real. Because somewhere along the line, they learned that being real meant being weak. And so they keep playing a role. They keep performing a masculinity that is all armor and no heart. But that armor becomes a prison, and over time it gets heavier. It takes more energy to keep it on. The charm starts to fade. The impulsivity becomes destructive. The boyishness becomes embarrassing. And still, the inner boy resists growing up, not because he doesn't want to, but because he doesn't know how. No one modeled it. No one said, "Here's how a man holds anger without lashing out. Here's how a man takes accountability without collapsing into shame. Here's how a man shows love without fearing loss of power." So he does what he's always done. He escapes into distractions, into addictions, into fantasies of success, into shallow validation. Anything to avoid the terrifying, liberating work of becoming whole. Now let me ask you something difficult. Have you grown up? I don't mean, are you an adult? I mean, have you faced your wounds, your shadows, your fears? Have you broken the patterns you inherited from your father or his father? Have you stopped blaming others for your pain and started owning your power to transform it? Because if not, then the boy is still in charge. And the boy can't carry your future. Only you can. The myth of the father, why the absence of male initiation creates lifelong emotional orphans. There's a story that's been quietly passed down for generations, not through words, but through silence. It's the story of the absent father, not always physically absent, but emotionally unavailable, spiritually disconnected, or simply unprepared to pass on what a son truly needs. And because this story is so common, we've stopped seeing it as a story. We've mistaken it for normal life. But the absence of real male initiation, the absence of the father as a guide, a mirror, a challenger, leaves behind something invisible but deeply damaging for a generation of emotional orphans, men who are grown in body but unclaimed in spirit, men who are still searching for a father figure, or worse, still trying to become the man their father never showed them how to be. The philosopher Ivan Illig once said that school is the advertising agency which makes you believe that you need the society as it is. In the same way, the modern family structure, fragmented, rushed, distracted, has become the silent machine that makes many boys believe they're on their own. That becoming a man is something you figure out through trial and error, through pain and shame, through either rebellion or conformity. But the truth is this: without initiation, you don't grow, you just age. You get older, but not deeper. You gain years, but not wisdom. And this is what we see everywhere today. Men who are trying to lead families, build companies, chase dreams, but all while carrying the unspoken ache of not knowing who they are at the core. In traditional cultures, boys were initiated into manhood by the community. There was ceremony, symbolism, and struggle. The elders would take the boy away from the mother, away from the comfort and safety of childhood, and introduce him to the wild, terrifying, beautiful world of responsibility. He would learn that life is not just about receiving, but about giving, not about being protected, but about protecting. And most importantly, he would be seen by men who had walked the path before him not as a child, but as someone ready to carry weight, to hold pain, to become something more. But in modern life, this initiation almost never happens. The father is either too wounded, too distracted, or too absent to offer it. And so the son is left wondering, what does it mean to be a man? And when no one answers, he turns to culture. He looks at celebrities, influencers, fictional heroes. And what does he find? he finds the myth of dominance, the myth of cool detachment, the myth of success as salvation, and he tries to live up to it. He tries to perform it. But deep down, something never clicks. Because no matter how much money he makes, how many women he sleeps with, how many followers he earns, he still hasn't heard the one thing every man needs to hear from another: you are enough. You've crossed the threshold. You belong now, not because you've achieved, but because you're ready to serve. And so, without that moment, he remains an emotional orphan. He might become a father himself, but still feel like a boy pretending to be a man. He might find love, but sabotage it because he's terrified of being truly seen. He might build a career, but feel hollow inside because no amount of success can fill the space left by an uninitiated soul. And the worst part, he might pass the same story down to his son simply because he doesn't know how to write a new one. So what can we do? We start by grieving what we never got. We stop pretending that our fathers were more than they were, and we stop hating them for what they couldn't give. We recognize that they too were likely emotional orphans, boys inside men's bodies, doing their best with what little they had. And in that recognition, we begin to reclaim something sacred, the right to initiate ourselves, to find other men who are on the path, to step into fire willingly, to look ourselves in the mirror and say, I am no longer waiting for a father to make me whole. I will become the man I needed. And maybe, just maybe, the next generation won't have to search so hard. Maybe they'll grow up not just with fathers but with initiators, with men who carry wisdom, not just wounds, with men who understand that growing up isn't about getting older. It's about taking your place in the world, fully awake, fully responsible, and fully real. The Eternal Boy: How Escapism, Fantasy, and Pleasure Replace Purpose in the Modern Man If the Absence of Initiation Creates Emotional Orphans, then modern culture hands those orphans a seductive escape hatch, a world built on endless pleasure, distraction, and fantasy. We're not just talking about video games, porn, social media, or consumerism, though those are certainly part of it. We're talking about something deeper, more existential: substitution of purpose with escape. A slow, quiet surrender of the masculine soul. And the longer we avoid that truth, the more we see men who never stop being boys, not because they can't grow up, but because they've been given every reason not to. We live in a world engineered for dopamine. Everything is available instantly. You can be entertained, validated, aroused, and distracted without ever leaving your room. And at first, it feels like freedom. No one telling you what to do, no pressure to perform, no responsibility weighing you down. It feels like autonomy. But it's not. It's avoidance. Avoidance of the real work of becoming. Avoidance of pain, struggle, and purpose. And the cost is devastating, not just to individual men, but to the relationships and communities that depend on them. Here's the brutal truth: a man without purpose is a man at war with himself. And when you strip away purpose, you don't get peace, you get chaos. You get men who numb themselves with pleasure, who drift from one shallow thrill to the next, who fear commitment because it requires depth, who mock discipline because it threatens their comfort. And it's not because they're lazy. It's because no one ever showed them that there's something deeper than comfort. That being a man is not about avoiding pain, but about choosing which pain is worth carrying. Now, you might ask, what's wrong with pleasure? Isn't it natural to want to enjoy life? Well, of course it is. But pleasure without purpose is just anesthesia. It dulls the ache without healing the wound. And after a while, the high wears off. The game isn't fun anymore. The hookup feels empty. The scrolling becomes compulsive. And still, the deeper hunger remains the hunger for meaning, for challenge, for direction. But by then, the eternal boy has forgotten how to look for it. He's been trained to seek intensity, not depth, novelty, not wisdom, validation, not truth. And this is where the philosophical stakes rise, because the question isn't just why do men avoid responsibility, but it's what happens to a society when its men no longer pursue transcendence. What happens when the masculine impulse to build, protect, sacrifice, and serve is replaced with consumption, avoidance, and self-interest? You don't just get broken men, you get a broken world. You get relationships that collapse under the weight of unmet expectations. You get families without foundation. You get communities without leadership. You get a generation of boys who are masters of pleasure, but strangers to purpose. But here's the twist. The eternal boy is not evil. He's not shallow. He's wounded. He's scared. He's hiding. Underneath all the distractions is a soul that still longs to rise. A part of him, however buried, still craves the fire, still wants to be tested, still wants to be needed. Because that's the paradox. The very thing he's avoiding, responsibility, pain, sacrifice, is the very thing that would make him feel alive again. So how do we wake him up? Not by shaming him, not by mocking his pleasures, but by calling him back to purpose, by offering him something bigger than himself, a mission, a vision, a path. We don't just say, stop escaping. We say, come home. There's work to do. There's a place for you in the world, but you have to earn it, not through achievement, but through integrity, through effort, through transformation. And that journey doesn't start with a grand gesture. It starts with a choice, a moment of honesty, a decision to stop running, to turn around and face whatever you've been avoiding, your fear, your failure, your pain, and to ask the question that every man must eventually face: what am I here for? Not what will make me feel good, not what will prove I'm enough, but what will anchor me in something real. Because in the end, it's not the pleasures that define us. It's the purpose we choose, the weight we carry, and the courage we show when we stop hiding behind the boy and let the man finally stand up. The rise of the integrated man, how to break the cycle and finally grow into who you were meant to be. There comes a point in every man's life, sometimes in the quiet of the night, but sometimes in the middle of heartbreak. Sometimes in the mirror after yet another empty win, where he realizes something is missing, but not in the world, but in him. Despite the success, the distractions, the charm, the strength, there's a hollowness. A feeling that he's been living with the volume turned down on his own soul. And in that moment he has a choice: to numb it again, to escape, to blame, or to face it. That's where the integrated man begins to rise. Not as a perfect hero, not as some mythic alpha, but as a man who finally stops running and starts becoming. Integration means wholeness. It means no longer rejecting the parts of yourself you were taught to hide: your fear, your grief, your tenderness, even your rage. It means you stop performing masculinity and start embodying it. But you stop trying to be what the world told you a man should be, and you start becoming who you actually are, with depth, with humility, and with power. But make no mistake, integration is not a soft path. It is a brutal, sacred unraveling, because before you can build the real you, you have to tear down the false one. This is where philosophy stops being abstract and becomes a map. Because the question, "Who am I?" isn't just a thought experiment, it's the beginning of transformation. You start asking, what do I actually value? What am I afraid to feel? What parts of me have I exiled to survive in a world that rewards masks over truth? When you ask these questions honestly, you begin to see that growing up isn't about killing the boy inside you, it's about fathering him. You become the man who holds the child, not the man who hides from him. An integrated man doesn't need to dominate others because he's mastered himself. He doesn't need to impress everyone because he's already impressed the one person who matters, the man in the mirror. He's not fearless, he just doesn't let fear make his decisions anymore. He doesn't need a woman to complete him or a job to validate him, though he welcomes both with gratitude. Because he knows that his worth isn't earned through trophies, it's revealed in the way he carries his life, his wounds, and his love. And here's the irony: when you become integrated, everything you were chasing finally starts to come. Not because you're desperate for it, but because you've become ready for it. Real love, real brotherhood, real work that matters. People sense you're not pretending anymore. You're not performing. You're rooted. You're home. And that's rare. That's magnetic. That's masculine, not in the shallow cultural sense, but in the ancient, grounded, unshakable sense. You become a man who others can lean on, who can hold space in chaos, who can walk into fire and come out with wisdom. But you don't get there by waiting. You get there by choosing, by breaking the cycle of avoidance, of blame, of numbness, by saying, enough, enough hiding, enough escaping, enough living half a life. You get there by surrounding yourself with people who challenge you to rise, not just people who make you feel safe staying small. You get there by embracing discipline not as punishment, but as devotion. Discipline to your soul, discipline to your purpose, discipline to the man you know you could be. So let me ask you directly, with no fluff, what are you waiting for? Who do you think is coming to save you? There is no father, no mentor, no God, no woman who can do the work for you. There is only you. And that is not a curse, it's a calling. You are the one you've been waiting for. And the moment you stop avoiding that truth is the moment your real life begins. The boy had dreams. The man builds them. The boy wants to be seen. The man sees himself. The boy runs from pain. The man carries it with dignity. And in that quiet, beautiful, terrifying moment when the boy finally bows and the man steps forward, you don't just grow up. You arrive.